Hey everyone, it's Tom Franklin here. I just want to let you know that I just published a book called They Were Men Not Saints, and the reason for publishing it is that I'm a little tired of seeing so many people in the country choose one candidate versus another without knowing that the candidate is just repeating what has been said many times before, and to choose one side versus the other, Democrat, Republican, whatever it happens to be, not really knowing the history of either party, and they're not as isolated as most people think. But before we get there, I'd like to start actually with a little humor, a little joke, and that is a little boy and asks his father what politics is about, and the father simply replies that he's the capitalist making the money, and his wife is the boy's mother, and is the administrator. The boy is the people, the working nanny for them, and is the representative of the working class, and the boy's little brother is the future. So he said, go ahead and think about that for a while. So the boy does, and over the next day, he sees little brother has filled his diaper. He goes over to see his mother. Mother's sound asleep. He goes to the nanny's room, locked door. Goes to the guest room and finds his father in bed with the nanny. So the next day, he actually walks over to the father and says, Dad, I think I figured out politics. While the capitalist is screwing the working class, government is asleep, and the future is pretty much in deep. Full diaper. Yeah, it's a classic tropey, funny joke, and that would be great on a doorman, because that's exactly what he would say over and over again. The problem is none of it is actually true, and with all due respect to Tim Allen, it's just lie after lie after lie, because without entrepreneur like Outdoor Man, without the government's help, he wouldn't even get that store started. And unless he's trying to build his own roads, unless he's trying to dig his own well for the water supply, unless he's building up his own power plant, he really doesn't have a shot at getting there. And no entrepreneur does. Government is involved in every one of those aspects. And as a result, when things go bad, again, the government comes into play with Social Security payments, with unemployment payments. Yes, take that, Ayn Rand. Without, life doesn't always go as planned. So you need government to support it. So it basically undergirds the entire free market and the working class itself and the capitalism to actually make this thing work. And in the last 5 years, our stock market has doubled because of this, and so it's done pretty well. And future is anything but in the crapper. So it's doing pretty well. Now, let's go on. And for that, I will actually add 10 more points that I'd like to say for the 10 concepts we can learn from studying U.S. history. And number one is that our K-12 system, unfortunately, is horrible at it because it generally only teaches one side. So, because of that, we have the same ridiculous arguments back and forth, because they're only talking about one half of the story that actually made this country. Whatever the topic is, it's just one point after another of the same concepts that have been discussed repeatedly. And for a simple example of that is the concept of slavery. And yes, everybody says slavery was horrible. It was a horrible thing to do. There's only one problem with it. Without it, I wouldn't be having this conversation, because America wouldn't exist. So, which choice do you want? Without the slavery, we don't exist. And with this great country we built, we had to go through that in order to get here. So which choice do you want to make? Number two, there is not a politician today that can conjure up a single new idea. The reason is because all of them had already been done. They've already been tried multiple times over the last 250 years, and some of them have worked, Some of them have not. But in general, just some examples of it. On Truman, the Truman era HWAC committee, House Un-American Activities Committee, basically, find your closet communist, and did that for a number of years. We repeated it again with George W. Bush in 2001's Patriot Act. Basically, same stuff. Find your nearest underplayer who's trying to skirt away with something. It gets a little ridiculous. FDR's New Deal compared to LBJ's Great Society, just rinse and repeat, and trying to make sure that the laws work versus trying to give the same underclass that FDR was trying to help a break under LBJ. Same stuff. And of course, Medicare's program under LBJ to Obamacare, for 50 odd years later. So, it's rinse and repeat. How about Ike's tax hike? He had high taxes in the early 50s, built his highway program, and had to do some dirty deeds outside of the country to do it. Nobody ever talks about that. To Kennedy's tax cut. Basically, Ike raises the taxes, gets the money in, builds the highway program, and then we hit recession in the late 50s, and Kennedy comes in and cuts taxes. Well, wait a second, Kennedy was a Democrat. Why was he cutting taxes? Because today he would be Republican. And back then he was considered Democrat, still is considered Democrat, but basically he had Republican motives. And Reagan, 20 odd years later, did exactly the same thing, just copied him again, over and over again. On Clinton's payroll tax cut, Bush 43's tax cut to get us out of the recession. It's all been the same. And now, talking about bailouts from Grover Cleveland, late 19th century, bailed out the country. What was the choice? He was on his the country was on his 6th or 7th depression, and it was either bail out the economy or have another depression. And so we pulled in J.P. Morgan and said, "Hey, can you bail us out?" Same thing. FDR bailed us out again, 1940s. Even after we went through the Federal Reserve, still didn't stop the depressions. So we did it again in the 30s. Well, but FDR did something really great. He put in Glass-Steagall, which basically separated investment banks from depositors. Great. Stop all the malfeasance going on, and it worked great for about 30 years. Reagan didn't like it. He finally just said, we're going to actually, open up these banks to more investments. And what happens? Yeah, the economy grew a little bit for about 4 or 5 years, and then for the exact same reason, it crashed in the late 80s. So, there's a reason why FDR put that stuff in. And as I said, Reagan said, "No, get rid of government. We don't need it." And look what happens. And Clinton deregulated again. So it's not just a Republican issue, it's also Democratic. Clinton deregulated again 10 years later, and we ended up with a meltdown in 08 with all the banks closing because they lost control of dividing their deposits from their investments over and over and over again. So what does Obama do? He creates a whole new thing called Dodd-Frank and replaces Glass-Steagall with exactly the same thing, just calls it a different name. So we have repeated this stuff for 150 years, and even before that, it's just over and over and over again. We would be better off if we actually knew all this stuff so we could ask the candidates a few better questions about what they're actually going to do. Now, so competitive enough, cyclical enough of that. Now, we do, this is number 3, we do cycle between policing the world and isolationism. We've done it repeatedly, and did it in the 1830s, did it in of course the 1910s, and 1920s with Harding. Went from policing the world under Roosevelt to Harding's isolationism for another 10 years. And what do you know? We go isolation through Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. We don't want anything to do with Europe, and what happens? A madman in Europe takes over because we weren't policing it. And that's the problem. If we go policing, we can actually control these things. We can have trade agreements and with tariffs. We can actually control things. We can at least work with our partners around the world. And when we go isolation, Yeah, we focus on ourselves, but the problem is bad things happen in the world and we end up paying more for it later when we have to deal with it. Well, um, it is time, we have to recognize that there's a benefit to actually doing the policing or the international agreements. Number four, as I've mentioned a few times already, we've never had a president who was on one side, entirely on one side or the other in terms of policies. Over and over and over again, they have elicited and used policies that are both liberal at times and policies that are conservative at times. Case in point, Hoover started out as a pure Republican. No one was going to touch his treasury. Kept it all right, except the economy didn't go anywhere. And then when the stock market crashed, he was in really deep doo-doo because he refused to get to spend some of the cash. Finally, toward the end of his administration, he finally started playing socialism and started pouring out money to the farmers to get them to work. It still didn't work. Roosevelt took over and literally copied the same thing. Just pour more money out. So Roosevelt gets blamed for being a socialist when Hoover was one who started it. He was Republican. Now, and JFK's domestic agenda, and he would, as I said before, he would be considered Republican today, considering that he cut the taxes and then started pouring money into different programs to get people Peace Corps and what have you. So, it's most of the presidents have used multiple policies from both sides of the fence because one tends to work at one time and another tends to work at another time. There's no isolation. There's no individual policies, individual one side versus the other. We're all Democratic now. No, it doesn't work that way. Okay, now we're up to number 5. Oh, this one I love. This is a historical take on everybody from Andrew Jackson, post-Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, and up to just before Lincoln. And historians call every one of them useless because they didn't solve anything. They didn't put an end to the debate over the free state, slave state, the slavery stuff. They didn't prevent the war. They did absolutely nothing. Nothing could be further from the truth. The number one thing that all 7 of them did was that prevented a war, which means they prevented 600,000, 700,000 American men and women from dying. That's not a bad thing. That actually is a pretty good thing that they were able to pull that off. In addition, Millard Fillmore and others actually went out and opened up trade routes, just as Monroe had done, covering the pirate wars to pay for the Louisiana Purchase, and Fillmore went out and opened up Japan. They even opened up a little bit of China. They actually acted very positively and got things done. But number one is that they kept compromising to avoid having Americans kill each other. To me, that's a pretty darn good thing. And number 6, well, I should say also Martin Van Buren. Yeah, one of those lost guys created our U.S. Treasury. So I'd say that's a pretty darn good thing. Right, number 6, everybody believes that generally that Lincoln ended slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation. Not exactly. Not even close. What he did was he knew very well that he was going to lose a war, so he just emancipated to get more African American, get the slaves into positions where they could actually join the army and to actually save the Union. There was no altruism about it. He didn't really believe that African Americans could actually lead the country. That wasn't his point at all. However, one guy actually did end slavery. The guy's name was George Washington, and he did it in his own term in 1794. Did it with his Slave Trade Act, which simply meant that he ordered ships not to be built big enough to actually contain slaves. He basically said, we're not going to do that again. So he shut down the importation of slaves that way. Now, what happened, the reason, why didn't it stop? Why didn't slavery? Well, the reason it happened is because the states actually didn't listen to it. Specifically North Carolina and South Carolina. They knew very well that their main trade was in cotton. And they said, well, heck, if he's gonna do that, then we're gonna skirt our way around it and try to get slaves from elsewhere because our cotton is king here. Now, so yeah, so the slave when has a state not argued with the union, with the GSA pretty much every other year. So it was no different then. But if they had not done that, we wouldn't be here, because without that slavery, without that cotton, America would not have become what it actually became. So there's a positive and as usual, positive and negative thing. Another thing on Washington, he signed another act same year called the Fugitive Slave Act, which simply meant that anyone's slave, landowners, any of their slaves escaped, they had a legal right to actually go ahead and pull them back in. And Washington himself did exactly that. Chased down all the slaves. He brought them into Washington, into the nice house, and so they had a nice time being the slaves in the house. Had a nice time. But several of them didn't want to be slaves. Who would? So they escaped, and he tracked them all down. There was only one that escaped. So he's got some good things going on for him, and not so good things going on for him. Now, I should say also that that same Slave Trade Act was reinforced about 60 years later by Fillmore again and by Buchanan under Dred Scott, where the courts actually used that same act to say, look, that landowner has a right to go and get Dred Scott out of Chicago and bring him back. One of the worst Supreme Court decisions I have, but we've had many Supreme Court decisions that have been bad. So Washington in general, he was a landowner. He was not a saint, as great as he was. And again, they were men. They were not saints. Number 7. We had seven depressions in 100 years, between 1800 and 1900. 7 depressions. And we tried everything. We tried everything to stop one recession after another, but they just kept failing. Capitalism kept failing one after the other. It built Erie Canal, it built the railroads, built a lot of stuff, but it also failed. We tried swapping currency for gold, and that killed us. Andrew Jackson did that. He literally just said, we're not going to do the currency thing anymore, we're going to do the gold thing. And because it was so difficult to get gold, the economy crashed. And the banker, Martin Van Buren, as vice president, had to come in and literally swap that whole thing out and put it in U.S. Treasury. And 7 depressions. And that, of course, led up to J.P. Morgan's bailing us out in 1893. No. It's a free market system, but it's damn hard to run. Number 8. Interesting fact about the 14th Amendment. A lot of people were talking about the Article 3 of the 14th Amendment, which meant that any insurrectionist during the Civil War could not be allowed to run for president. Well, it just so happened. Everybody got excited about that, maybe it would happen, trouble, what have you. The little problem with that is that Congress actually repealed that about 5 years later and said that any of those insurrectionists were basically going to pardon them from doing that thing, except for the ones that during the war. And about 30 years later, they actually cleaned out the rest of them. So basically, Article 3 is pretty much gone. We have no way. Congress had initially set it up for Congress to make the rule. But now, it's effectively neutered. So it's kind of pointless. Number 9. Kind of what I've been saying all along. The public generally sees each politician as having a new idea, and none of them do. The day the voters actually figure this out and actually apply better questions to the candidates, we'll get better candidates when we get better leaders. Number 10. We've had presidents. We chased down Putin, we chased down others who are using nuclear weapons in various places, Ukraine and elsewhere, if they're doing that. We've had presidents who've actually applied the nuclear technology to their own foreign policy. Truman did it against Mao and against North Korea. Basically threatened them with dropping the new weapon at the time, nuclear bomb. And Eisenhower came in and just literally applied the same thing. He even took out the Iranian democratically elected leader in Iran solely to get the oil so he could build his highway system. Nice, it helped us out. But what it did is it literally put in motion 25 years of dictatorship in that area, and we're still suffering from that with the Islamic Republic. That's what it turned into. He used the same nuclear policy. He also took out foreign leaders in Guatemala and Honduras. So Eisenhower, as great as he was domestically and as bright as he was, used some dirty deeds to get things done. Of course, none of this is discussed. Now, lastly, number 11. Gee, we've had three presidents impeached now. Two came within a single Senate vote of being tossed out, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton. Two committed treasons. Two candidates committed treason as candidates. They both became president. Nixon committed treason against Johnson, and Reagan committed treason against Carter. None of this is discussed. And of course, one resigned from office, Nixon. Well, we're beginning to look less like a paragon and more like something else. So I just want to let you guys know that we need to ask better questions. We need to know our history, own history better, and ask better questions in order to solve real problems in this country. Thanks for listening.